Hello, this is Ruban Selvanayagam and welcome to another Property Solvers podcast. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Tina Walsh, who's the CEO of the National Association of Property Sourcing Agents, author of the book Property Sourcing Compliance, How to Stay on the Right Side of the Law, and professional sourcer and managing director of Sanctuary Property Sourcing, operating in the Northwest. Thanks for joining us today, Tina. How are you doing?
You're very welcome. I'm doing very well, thank you. Very busy, but not complaining.
That's all good. Busy's good, right?
It is, yeah, it's very good.
Good stuff. So I've entitled this podcast an interview, Property Sourcing 101. And just a bit of background. I first came across your book probably around 2017, as we were originally passing on properties to investor contacts of ours that didn't fit. We were passing on properties that didn't fit within our own criteria as a cash home buying company. And this was prior to us setting up our own estate agency and auction house service. So I thought it would be interesting to speak to you because we're now working with property sourcers directly who bring properties to us, which we market to our own principally through our own auction house, but our estate agency as well. And sometimes we buy them ourselves. So perhaps you can start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into this world of property sourcing and compliance.
Wow. Well, we started by actually investing ourselves back in 2005. And we were around, sadly, for the crash of 2007, 2008. Which meant that it was a little bit painful for investors at that point in time, especially the way that we had invested, which was brand spanking new off plan for a local builder. And then I'd always loved property and I wanted to start a business rather than working for various other people, doing all sorts of different things from business administration to database development, management, all sorts of different things. I decided I wanted to start a business in the property sector. And so was listening to one of the major mentors at the time in the sector and decided that I would work with them.
Yeah.
And in January 2012, started mentorship. And it was mentioned to us that despite the fact that we had had a painful experience, shall we say, in investing to that date, had we considered property sourcing? And that was January 2012. And I said, well, what's property sourcing? And our mentor said, well, go off and research it. And so that was where the whole property sourcing journey started, although we'd already invested in properties ourselves. Our children were quite used to living in houses with bare plaster walls and no carpets whilst we were renovating them to live in.
Mm-hmm.
It took me 10 months or so to understand the legislation and the regulation around it. I based it around high street estate agents. And in that time was networking to find investors to work with.
Right.
And we got an investor to work with at the end of 2012 and sourced and got paid for our first sourced deal in February 2013, which at the time was £1,500. And I still have a laminated copy of the cheque just to prove it.
Nice.
So that was where the property sourcing started, really, although we have been investing ourselves up the property ladder and purchasing properties off plan to rent out, which sadly, as I said, just before the crash of 2007, 2008, didn't really work to plan.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so is property sourcing kind of your main area currently, or are you still kind of involved with the off-plan investing?
Our last investment was 2018, and we purchased a repossessed double block of flats in the Northwest. The idea was that we buy, refurbish, refinance. We had finance offer in place. We bought with cash and bridging. Partway through the renovation, I have a background in the healthcare sector. A healthcare company approached us and asked if we knew of any properties in the area. And we said, well, we're renovating one. We hadn't planned on selling, but by all means, come and have a look. They had a look, made us an offer for the bricks and mortar that we couldn't really turn down. So instead of buy, refurbish, refinance, we actually flipped. And that was 2018. Since then, we've been very busy on other projects, which I'm sure we'll talk about. And so our personal investments have ground to a halt at this moment in time, although going forward, we do still plan to do some more.
Okay. And why did you set up the National Association of Professional Sourcing Agents, or NAPSA, as it's called?
I realised when I was on my journey that there was no one place to go to for guidance, support, advice. Guidance on regulations and legislation can be a bit hit and miss, and it can be a bit highbrow or very difficult to understand. And so, having worked in the sourcing sector for so many years, it has a really, really poor reputation, quite deservedly at times. And a lot of sourcing agents operate sometimes knowingly, completely illegally, just to get cash out of the investor and then disappear and spend it. Quite often, they don't intend to start out that way, but because of poor access to accurate information around compliance in the sourcing sector, they end up operating illegally themselves. So NAPSA was set up. It's a not-for-profit, although I really dislike the term not-for-profit. You have to have a profit to run these days.
Yeah.
It is a limited company by guarantee, which means there are no shareholders. So if you like, it's the legacy business is NAPSA. Hopefully it will be around for many, many years, even after I'm pushing up daisies. And it's been set up to sit alongside the likes of Property Mark, Arla, and AEA, but specifically for the property sourcing sector, so that those sourcers who want to just even reach minimum standards, which is what NAPSA is set at, they can come to NAPSA, they can join for £195 plus VAT per year.
Right.
We aid them one-on-one through the registration and the compliance process and support them until they're approved.
Right.
But NAPSA is much more than a trade body. We are now in partnership with both redress schemes that are government approved for the property sales sector, which is the Property Ombudsman and Property Redress scheme. And we also work very closely with National Trading Standards and HMRC's anti-money laundering team, who I've just been exchanging emails with this morning, because they're keen to understand the sector more and learn. And NAPSA is working with them so that going forward, hopefully in the future, all the information that's out there around setting up your sourcing business, operating daily, everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet, and the message is exactly the same, which it isn't at this moment in time. So we're not just a trade body. Our site allows investors from anywhere in the world to actually come and search completely free of charge for an approved NAPSA sourcer to work with. And they can search either geographically and or from strategy, and the system will find those sourcing agents that are approved that meet their criteria. It's completely free for the investor to then communicate with that sourcing agent and work with them. As I said, the sourcing agent pays an annual fee for membership, but NAPSA does not take any fee from them for any deals that they do. So we do not take a percentage cut of their sourcing fee. We're not interested in that. I know how hard sourcing agents work for their sourcing fee. We do it ourselves on a day-to-day basis. So NAPSA is about support and guidance and around keeping those sourcing agents that are interested right at the front end and the core of full compliance in the UK at this moment in time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's great. And yeah, I mean, it's amazing how, I mean, we deal with property sources on a regular basis, and it's amazing to hear that quite a few of them aren't aware of their kind of obligations to comply with the legislation and, you know, the various regulations that govern the industry. So perhaps you can give us a little bit of an outline of what the key pieces of legislation and regulatory frameworks are that property sourcers, perhaps those that are starting out in this sector, or you know, are already involved and are not aware about it. Yeah, could you give us a little bit of a breakdown of the core pieces of legislation that people should be aware of?
Well, the first thing, if you're interested in what legislations govern us, is to Google search legislation and regulation for estate agents. We're governed by exactly the same, and it brings up a list. There's about 15 of them in total. But to give you an idea as to the core ones, you're talking consumer protection regulations.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Talking the Estate Agents Act 1979. You're talking anti-money laundering regulations, data protection regulations, Consumer Act, contract law, all sorts of different law around that. That basically they have to have a really good understanding of so that they can ensure that they're operating legally. The one that we're seeing at the moment that is providing the most fines around the sourcing sector is definitely the anti-money laundering regulations.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we run an auction house, and we had HMRC investigate what we do. Well, we run auction house and an estate agency, and they investigated what we do. And anti-money laundering was a really big issue for them, you know. And I think they're clamping down quite heavily on estate agents and auctioneers, and just checking that all the boxes are being ticked. Why do you think that is? I mean, is there been a kind of spike in money laundering or something? You know, it seems to be really on top of their list in terms of, you know, what they're looking at. Why do you think that's kind of come into play?
It's come into play because it's come to light over many years through the National Crime Agency's involvement within, obviously, crime across the UK, that they guesstimate, and really it is a guesstimate, that at least 100 billion with a B a year is laundered through the UK. And of course, it damages us. So they're looking at ways as to how they can combat that. And a lot of money is transferred through property transactions. And the reason that HMRC are looking at the estate agency, the high street estate agent sector, from auction houses, as you say, lettings agents, estate agents, and property sourcing agents, whom they're now very aware of, is the fact that we are considered to be frontline in property transactions. So we meet the clients, we meet the sellers and the buyers before anyone else in the process meets them. And so they're putting us on the front line. We are not the only line of defence. Obviously, solicitors, accountants, finance providers, anybody else that advises, especially under FCA guidance around finances for property transactions and the legal sales process, such as solicitors, are also governed under the regulations and have to carry out their own due diligence. But we are at the front line, and we are the first ones to actually hit the ground running, if you like. So they expect us to have an incredibly good knowledge of risks, of red flags, of assessing risks, and of having all of the legal documentation in place for us to be able to do that on a day-to-day basis, client by client basis. And they do take their job incredibly seriously, as you say.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it seems to be that they've kind of stepped up over the last couple of years as well, from what we're seeing anyway. You know,
well, prior to HMRC being involved, it was the Office of Fair Trade that used to deal with it until 2014, when HMRC took over. And since HMRC took over, gradually year on year, the level of fines has significantly increased, not just the overall level of fines, but the individual level. As far as I'm aware, the highest fine issued to a large estate agency company to date was in the region of 216,000.
Wow.
But if you were looking at specifically the sourcing sector, the largest fine I have seen for a sourcing agent was in the region of 24,000.
Wow. And what was the reason? Was it just non-compliance, or, you know, not registering properly?
Not registering, not knowing what you're doing, trading and not knowing what you're doing, basically. And to be quite honest, in the sourcing sector at this moment in time, that will be 99% plus of sourcing agents in the UK.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think a lot of property sources are just completely unaware that they need to register for all these kind of things, you know. And so what if you know, are there any pieces of legislation, because you mentioned that estate agencies, property sources are governed in the same way as estate agents are. Are there any pieces of legislation or regulations that govern property sources that, you know, that needs to be kind of added in addition to what governs estate agents and auctioneers? You know, are there any extra pieces of legislations that property sources need to be aware of?
There's no extra legislation for us, because basically we are considered to carry out estate agency work.
Right.
So when people say estate agents, they always think of the high street estate agent, but HMRC refer to estate agency businesses, which covers a wide variety of ramifications, including your auction houses, lettings agents, new house builders, all sorts of people that could carry out transactions which would be considered to be estate agency business. And HMRC have recently updated their guidance, and they now cover what they're calling property finders, which is the property sourcing sector. So they are now actually named within the legislation, the regulation, the guidance on it as far as HMRC are concerned. I know from working with them that they are now very aware of the property sourcing sector and where these deals are done on social media. And I can well imagine that HMRC certainly have the capabilities of, shall we say, disappearing into social media channels, including WhatsApp and Facebook, not be seen as HMRC, but be monitoring what is happening with some of these deals that are being done in the background.
So a lot of people, well, a lot of sources would obtain their properties via estate agents themselves. Is it okay for them to assume that the relevant legislation has been complied with already, or would they have to do their own checks with regards to clients that they're dealing with, both on the seller and the buyer side, if they're sourcing via an estate agent?
Whether you're sourcing via an estate agent or you're direct to vendor, you are expected to still carry out money laundering checks.
Okay.
The only difference for the sourcing agent is how you have to interpret the law. And this is where a good understanding, especially around money laundering, is concerned. You need to understand how HMRC would see us. If you take a standard high street estate agent, their contracted client, the person who pays their fee, is usually always the seller.
Yeah.
And so they have to carry out ID verification and client due diligence on the seller prior to marketing the property, which is the law. It is what is stated. They then have to carry out due diligence on the buyer at the point when an offer is accepted. Now, that is stipulated in the guidance from HMRC. As far as sourcing agents are concerned, 99.9% of the time, a sourcing agent's fees will come from the buyer. So we have to flip that guidance on its head. And we have to look and we have to say, and HMRC have confirmed this with me, as a sourcing agent, your contracted client is therefore the buyer because they're going to pay your fee. And you must have carried out ID verification and client due diligence prior to the business relationship forming, just as the estate agent does with the seller. You are still on a band to carry out client due diligence on the seller to the best level that you can do. Now, it's reasonably easy to do that because all you have to do is download the title register and check to see the name of the owner on there and check to see that it's the same name that the estate agent has given you that they are selling through. If not, then you start asking more questions. But you are absolutely expected to carry out your own due diligence. You are expected to have your own overall business risk assessment, your own client risk assessment, and your controls and procedures for your sellers and buyers, whether they're individuals, whether they are companies, or whether they are trusts, and have those written and kept for every client that you deal with, whether sellers or buyers.
Yeah. I mean, fortunately, even though there's quite a few hoops to jump through, checking these kind of things is a lot easier nowadays. There's a number of online tools that you can access to do all of these checks. Landmark is the one that we use, Credas. There's a number of different online tools, and the cost is not too extortionate. So it really is worth just kind of spending that money and getting it done, so you can make sure that all the boxes are ticked, rather than just kind of risk not doing these kind of things and potentially get into trouble. And those fines that Tina's mentioned are a lot higher than what I originally thought, to be honest. So yeah. The other interesting one is politically exposed persons. HMRC again seem to be kind of clamping down on this as well. Why do you think these checks have become so important?
Before we go into the PEPs aspect, we need to cover a little bit more on the electronic due diligence that you hinted at with
absolutely.
Landmark, and Landmark is actually the system that we use. I've been reading through, actually, strangely enough, this morning, HMRC's update on guidance, and they are very, very specific that just sending a client to an electronic due diligence system, even if it's facial recognition, does not constitute client due diligence for their guidance. Okay. There has to be two aspects to it. You have to do your own checks first and KYC, know your customer, know your client.
Yeah.
and then use aspects of that data then in the electronic due diligence system. So unlike a lot of estate agents and lettings agents do, and I'm sure sourcing agents do, it is not sufficient just to say to the client, I'm sending you to this system and all the electronic due diligence is done and then we're absolutely fine. That is not the case. Plus, the electronic systems cannot show you where the source of the funds for purchasing have come from, which is absolutely key as far as the buyer is concerned from a money laundering perspective. So please, electronic due diligence is essential for getting to such things, and we're going to talk about PEPs in a moment, places that you can't get to, but you absolutely have to have done your own due diligence and ask your own questions and risk assess that client first prior to using the electronic due diligence system.
Okay, so it's a two.
PEPs, yes, is politically exposed persons. And they're also going on about overseas entities, which are now held on Companies House, and you can now search for them.
Yeah.
They're also really heavily at the moment talking about something called proliferation financing. And sadly, we had a sourcing agent approach us a few weeks ago who was inspected by HMRC, and they were provided with an 11-page report on failures. And on every page, apart from all the other failures, it mentioned proliferation financing, which they are red hot on.
So
And
can you
whilst you
expand on
may
that a
have
little
no
bit?
idea what that means,
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah.
yeah, proliferation financing is where the money that is going to be used to purchase something comes from a company or source which could have been got from the manufacturing of dirty bombs, all sorts of different things that they talk about in the description of what it is. I actually on my desktop have a description of what it is. This is the definition directly from HMRC's guidance for estate agents and lettings agents. And it says proliferation financing means that the act of providing funds or financial services for use in the whole or in part in the manufacture, acquisition, development, export, transshipment, brokering, transport, transfer, stockpiling of, or otherwise in connection with the possession of or use of chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapons, including the provision of funds or financial services in connection with the means of delivery of such weapons and other CBRN-related goods and technology in contravention of a relevant financial obligation.
Wow.
Now, basically, in plain English, what that means is if you're working with a company and their product that they manufacture could be used in the creation of bombs, chemical weapons, all sorts of things, and you don't check that company out thoroughly, HMRC will be all over you like a rash, and that is
Right.
proliferation financing.
Right.
You asked about PEPs, yes, politically exposed persons, and they've just again updated the guidance on who they consider you absolutely have to check and who would be exempt. So you really need to go in and read that because it is quite a lot about it, and specifically the people that you don't have to check. The only way to get to know about PEPs is to use an electronic due diligence system, as you pointed out earlier. They're also red hot on what are known as overseas entities. That is, overseas people and or companies who purchase, sell, or currently own property or land within the UK now have to register and declare all that they own. The register is held on Companies House, and you can filter under advanced search for overseas entities to check if you're working with an overseas investor if they are registered, because by law they have to be registered. So those are some of the key aspects that HMRC are looking at, as well as, you know, how you get to the point of if you just have a client come to you and you just send them to an electronic due diligence system, you would never know about a company in proliferation financing or overseas entities or even PEPs.
Yeah, there's a lot of aspects involved, isn't there? Extra checks that need to be done these days for sure.
An awful lot.
Yeah, and going back to kind of setting yourself up as a property sourcer, what are the main bodies that you need to register with before you can go out and say of your business services as a property sourcer? What are the main? Who are the main ones? I know Property Ombudsman is one. Who are the others that you need to get registered with? or is property ombudsman sufficient enough?
No, sadly, but no. You need professional indemnity insurance, minimum £100,000 worth of cover, maximum excess of £1,000.
Okay, yeah, but
And
how
it's
can you
difficult.
explain what that is and why that's important and what it actually means for a property sourcer, how that protects them? Yeah.
Professional indemnity insurance, or PI insurance, protects you if your services fall short, or at least the client believes that your services have fallen short.
Right.
It will cover legal costs, court costs, and any compensation costs up to a certain level. And joining a Redress scheme, certainly the property ombudsman, you have to have that.
Yeah.
I have to say that if you're running a business in this day and age, you absolutely should have professional indemnity insurance in place.
Mm-hmm.
If you were asking for the services of a solicitor or an accountant, you would expect them to have professional insurance cover in place should anything go wrong. So insurance is the first thing. Then you have to join one of the 2 government-approved property redress schemes, and there are 2. The first, as you say, is the Property Ombudsman or TPO. The second is Property Redress Scheme or PRS. The cost is not far off the same. They do similar job roles in the redress scheme. Go and have a look at the sites and go with your gut feeling, but you have to register with one of them.
Right.
You also have to register with the Information Commissioner's Office or ICO for data protection supervision.
Of course, yeah.
And you have to register with HMRC for anti-money laundering supervision.
Yeah.
Those are your registrations. That is not full compliance.
Yeah.
Before you do any of that, I strongly suggest that you understand all the legislation and regulation that governs us, and you have all of the legally required documents in place that I mentioned earlier, and you have at least annual training in data protection and money laundering, because HMRC asks if you've had it, and they can ask you to prove it.
Yeah, yeah. And where can you access that training generally?
We provide specific compliance training for the sourcing sector. So we not only teach people how to source generally day to day, legally and compliantly, and we talked earlier about risk assessments, assessing your client for low and high risk, controls and procedures. We cover all of that. We provide a data protection and anti-money laundering course specifically for the sourcing sector, which is bespoke. And we also provide a legally required document pack, which contains the documents that we actually use in our own sourcing business, which I'm just spending hours updating at the moment and recording because of HMRC's changes. We also provide the documentation for that and 12 months support with that.
Right. And in terms of your annually, you need to be keeping up, your documentation updated. Do you help with that kind of side of things as well with regards to, maybe the AML checks and that kind of thing, making sure you're compliant? Because I know every year you need to be in touch with HMRC to keep them updated with where you are with regards to your company, new staff and all that kind of thing. HMRC need to know about all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, any changes at all, HMRC expect you to inform them more straight away. Even a 3-month delay can mean a fine for not updating them. But HMRC at the moment are constantly updating their guidance and the interpretation. So it's not just a matter of, once a month re-looking at it. Such as proliferation finance has only become really a big thing in the last 3 or 4 months. If you were to leave it 12 months and you were inspected, you would fail because you didn't know, you didn't stay up to date. So to answer your question about do we support people? Yes, we support people. When they purchase our training, they have 12 months support. As far as the documents are concerned, we're working on an extra smaller 1-year plan payment for you to be able to have updates on all of those documents that you've purchased year on year. When you join the National Association, we support one-on-one as well. So the guidance and the support are there now, which it never was when I was around. And that is our ultimate goal, is to provide that one-to-one support and guidance and really professionalize the sourcing sector.
That's excellent. Yeah. Okay. So kind of drawing the conversation to a close, finding investment properties is certainly not an easy or cheap task, sourcing properties out there, particularly finding, decent deals that would be of interest to an investor, or even an auction house or someone like ourselves. What can be done by, someone who's entering the property sourcing sector initially to minimize costs and the initial overheads, while still remaining compliant? You know, are there any kind of initial steps you would recommend for someone that's obviously wants to make sure that they, you know, they're ticking all the right boxes and doing what they need to do, but still is quite conscious about saving as much money as possible? You know, do you have any kind of recommendations or suggestions?
Yeah, from experience, don't go looking out for a great deal unless you have someone to buy that great deal, because you're wasting your time in the main.
Yeah.
The way that we started sourcing, quite by accident actually, that was we found an investor to work with and we knew exactly what that investor wanted. So if you set aside all the compliance and the paperwork and everything, you need to know your patch. You need to know, I would pick maybe one or two strategies that really interest you, really understand how you package up information for each of those strategies, understand on your patch exactly where they work and why they work there. Boots on the ground, learning is essential, and then find an investor and understand exactly what that investor wants and exactly how they are going to assess it. Because you and I both know that every investor assesses a deal completely differently. You can say ROI, you can say yield, you can say cash flow, but every one of them will have their own spreadsheets, their own formula to calculating if that works for them. So having a spreadsheet from a course, you might as well bin it. You need to know exactly how that investor is going to assess that deal, or you will never hit the nail on the head. So once you have all of the information from the investor, then you can go out. You should know the streets where the properties will match what the investor is wanting on price, on condition, on end usage. You should be able to then give all of that information to an estate agent or a lettings agent, be able to deliver handwritten letters to the appropriate properties to see if you can develop direct to vendor inquiries. And then you are cutting down the time and the money on marketing on your time out walking around the streets, because you're reducing the amount of walking that you have to do, and get those leads coming into you. And they should really be already filtered for the type of property that the investor will be looking for. You would filter them further, depending on the information that comes through, filter them down to the ones that are worthwhile viewing, make offers on those that match the criteria, and then package up the ones that match the criteria and the offers have been accepted to your investor for them to accept and to then progress on to the solicitor. And that is the tightest way of working without paying for a ton of marketing or 5,000 leaflets once every 2 weeks to try to get some sort of response, which, trust me, we've tried. And whilst it worked to a point, can be quite expensive and the responses are fairly low.
Yeah. Leafleting is one of those marketing strategies that I think you've really got to stick at it. I think just sending out 5,000 leaflets and expecting the leads to flow in, it's not realistic.
It's got to be consistent. And it's got to be sort of at least on a monthly basis, consistent message over a long period of time. And even then, the responses are fairly low in percentage wise. But if you know, for example, that your buyer wants a 2-bedroom terrace property for buy to let, you should be able to narrow down the streets where that would work. And so you hand delivering leaflets or written messages to those properties reduces your costs. And also working with lettings agents and estate agents locally, because you know exactly what you're looking for, means that they will then bring the properties that exactly match your criteria to you, cutting down the time, cutting down the workload, and cutting down the filtration before you can have the ones to actually view.
For sure. That's really interesting, Tina. I've really enjoyed this conversation. So how can people find out more about NAPSA and contact you? And if there's anything else you want to add, feel free to.
We're here to help and support anyone that's interested in having a national association, or they're already operating association, a property sourcing agent, or they're considering it. We offer free 15-minute calls. If you're interested in more information about NAPSA, you can visit their website, which is www.napsa.org.uk. Our training company is called getpropertycompliant.co.uk. You can reach our teams at hello@napsa.org.uk. Any questions, or just find me on Facebook and message me, whichever way, I really don't mind. We're there to help and support, and we'll do all we can to do that.
Brilliant. That's great. Well, I'll add all those links in the show notes as well. Tina, thanks so much for your time. It's really appreciated. And really interesting area. And I think property sourcers, you know, both newbie and those that have been involved in this industry for a little while, really need to be aware of what's going on, because yeah, the penalties seem to be increasing as well, and HMRC seems to be clamping down on a lot of this stuff, and it looks like the industry is evolving in a good way. I think it's good to have all these checks, and it makes the whole system a lot more transparent. But yeah, not kind of complying is likely to get you into more trouble than it's worth. So yeah, thanks very much for all your insights, Tina. Really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, and thank you for the invitation to be with you today.
That's great. Thank you.